Hello, this is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. Years ago, I had heard a story about remittance men at a place called Walhachin in British Columbia, and about a big long flume that was built to carry water to their settlement. I just had to find out about that story, and I was in that part of the country, so I pulled in. Driving west from Kamloops on the Trans-Canada Highway, the high mountains of the Canadian Rockies were behind us, and we approached the dry country of interior British Columbia. We were in the northern extension of a high desert area that ran all the way up from the Baja and the Gulf of Mexico. You will find small cactus and rattlesnakes in this northern extension of what started as the Sonoran Desert down in Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California. In the summertime, this is hot, dry country. The water you see there is the Thompson River. The Thompson River parallels Highway number 1, the Trans-Canada Highway, along the Kamloops area. And it flows westward and flows into the Fraser River and on to Vancouver and the Pacific Ocean. We are going to pull off the highway at the nearly abandoned community of Walhachin, because there's a story there. And the Walhachin is a half hour west of the city of Kamloops and probably 20 minutes from the junction at Cache Creek. The Thompson River broadens out in some areas between Kamloops and Walhachin. In pioneer times, Canada wanted settlers to fill up the prairies and advertised mainly in Britain for people to live on the Canadian prairies. The advertising fitted in with a rule about inheritance practiced in Britain. The rule was called primogeniture. It said that the eldest son inherited all of the wealthy parents' estate. Daughters were married off to other families, but the remaining sons were left with no inheritance. As a result of this dismal future, many young sons lost their drive and fell into bad habits that embarrassed the family with their well-to-do friends. These wealthy British families were pleased to send their wayward younger sons to far-off lands like Canada. To help them, the parents regularly sent money to help them out with living expenses, and in some cases, like in Walhachin, for example, to help them actually buy land. This payment was called a remittance, a payment to support their sons in far-off lands. These British settlers became known as remittance men, and numbered in the thousands to live and settle, in particular, the lands of Western Canada on the prairies. Chinese labor had built the railway through the country, but you needed more than just a railway. You needed motivation. This is the rail line along the Thompson River near Walhachin. Remittance men came to Walhachin, money in their pockets, but no knowledge of growing crops and no real motivation to work hard to develop a successful life in a country far from home. Other settlers regarded them as rich and lazy. Often the remittance men became the town drunks in many towns, with always enough money to buy booze. Money was not an adequate replacement for the security that came with home and family. With remittance men expected to succeed against a harsh environment with a strong motivation, it was not going to happen. Isolated Walhachin was doomed for failure. It was over 60 years ago when I escorted tours for Greyhound to Alaska. We rolled by this part of the Trans-Canada Highway, And I would ask the tourists if they could see that little line up on the side hills. It was a line parallel to the ground, very faint. And I told them that that was an old wood water flume that had been built in 1910. And it ran for 20 kilometers back up into the hills and brought water to a little community called Walhachin. And they needed the water because in those days they did not have the technology or the machinery to pull the water up from the Thompson River and onto the orchard fields where they needed the water. I pulled off the Trans-Canada onto Walhachin Road, crossed the steel bridge over the Thompson, and drove a short distance down a two-lane paved road into the town. Things had changed. I did not have to cross the river in boats like this anymore. Modern machinery now enabled it to them to pull water up from the river for essential irrigation. This is a sketch of the main building, the little museum. The sign said free admission, and it also said they'd be around by 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, it was a few minutes before 11. I had a little time to kill, and I was welcomed by Mr. Goat here. The goat stuck his nose between the boards, and I rubbed it and fed him a little bit of grass, and we were good friends. And before long, the lady who looked after the museum showed up. I introduced myself and went inside the museum. The Pennies ran an early ranch here in the 1870s, but overgrazing by too many cattle on both sides of the river changed the natural bunch grass to cactus and sagebrush. Both the Canadian Pacific and the Canadian National Railways ran through the area. The community blossomed. Potatoes and orchards of mainly apples were developed, particularly on the north side of the river. The town grew, but most original buildings are now gone. This was the big hotel in town that was officially opened by none other than the Prime Minister at the time, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. 12 new houses were built in 1913. There was soon a town hall, 2 restaurants, a bakery, a barber shop, a butcher's store, a dairy, a livery stable for the horses, a ladies' clothing store, insurance offices, and a school. And, of course, a local newspaper had also been established. This was the wedding picture of the Chetwynds. Ralph Chetwynd managed local orchards and properties, and later moved to northern BC, where the current town of Chetwynd was named after him. There is no doubt Walhachin was indeed a substantial community in its day. While we look at a few pictures I took when we were there, I can tell you that not all was perfect in paradise. The town had a rigid social structure. Only the better people, the aristocracy in the town, were allowed in the hotel and in the swimming pool. Promoters bought cheap land, made no improvements, then sold it to unsuspecting settlers. The affluent people became early snowbirds. They left for the winter to warmer climates, living a life of leisure. They never learned how to expand crops, never sought any agricultural advice whatsoever. Those few soldiers who returned from World War I could only purchase and settle on leftover poorer land. The Chinese, who had enabled the railway to come into the area and built the essential wood water flume later, were unable to purchase land and eventually left. That wood flume was lifeblood for the orchards. The museum had this miniature model of the flume. The flume itself took about 6 months to build, and it was largely done by former Chinese workers who had built the railway. Much of the flume was a straightforward piece of construction, and other places across some big ravines and divides, it was a substantial piece of construction. So the question is, why did the flume deteriorate and fall apart? Answer: World War I broke out. Once again, the young men of Walhachin were affected by something that was beyond their control or responsibility. The young men went to war. In Walhachin, it was 97 out of 107 eligible men that went to war. It was the highest rate for any community in Canada. Why so many? So many that had been abandoned beforehand by their home country on the basis of the primogeniture rule that only the eldest son inherited all of the parents' estate. What is the answer to the question? The answer is there is no place like home. It was a chance for the remittance men to see their homeland again. It was a chance to do your patriotic duty and fight for your country. It was a chance to get away from the physical, harsh, and less friendly environment of Western Canada. Further, the young men figured it would be no time at all. They'd just go and clean up that German army, and they'd be home right away. Little did they realize that the German army was not about to give up too easily. And it was several years later by the time most of the young men returned, and the wooden flume was in disrepair. For the remittance man, it was too much. It was time to quit. It was time to move on to another place, another chance. So what have we learned about the remittance men of Walhachin and the rest of Western Canada? Well, one thing that seems to be apparent is that you cannot continually favor one of your children, or in the case of a country, one of its ethnic cultural groups, over the advantage of the others endlessly. In a sense, Canada has made its indigenous people the remittance men of the 21st century. And in the long run, that is not a good policy. It is not good for the country. It's not good for the children. It's not good for the cultural groups affected. History has shown that it was not to the advantage of the remittance men to continually receiving gifts from their parents. Canada needs to reassess its policy toward cultural groups in the country and stop treating Indigenous people like the remittance men of the 21st century. I will leave you with that to think about. This is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. To find more of my videos and the places I've traveled, just do what it does there. It says there on the bottom, Google the little @ sign at Don Barnett 5090. Click my name. Hit the word playlists in the middle of the page and scroll down. Each playlist contains several travel videos. One more thing, if you hit the subscribe button, that will tell you when we're putting more videos up on the internet. So long for now.